Good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in, everyone on Zoom and Facebook Live. Welcome to tonight's show. We're so glad that you could join us. My name is Omar Columbus. I'm an Air Force veteran. I served on active duty for 12 years with deployments in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom. I'll be co-hosting tonight along with the amazingly talented Jenny Pacanowski. Welcome to tonight's Veteran Voices, the interview sessions. Tonight is a session of intimate artist conversations where we'll interview veterans whose art as actors, poets, visual artists, and playwrights are featured frequently in Poetic Theater's programming productions. As audience members, you are more than welcome to ask questions at the end of the program tonight. So please join us as we take a few moments to get to know the veterans behind the voices. Jenny?
Welcome, everyone. Hello. I'm Jenny Pacanowski. I was a combat medic in Operation Iraqi Freedom, and I am the founder and director of Women Veterans Empowered and Thriving. And I am now the program director of Veteran Voices, Poetic Theater Productions. I'm so grateful to be here tonight and to tell you a little bit about the programming that Tara was involved in, as well as Omar and myself, our facilitators. Warrior cultures of the past, the Greeks, the Romans, the Native Americans, had beautiful storytelling rituals of homecoming. We now bring this to a modern interpretation and context at Poetic Theater Productions, bringing home warriors from whether they served abroad or whether they served at home, cultivating a compassionate and thriving community of workshops and performance. We now would like to introduce Tara. Hold on one second. Hi, Tara. How are you?
Well, Tara Krause, she is an artist, printmaker, spoken word poet, and filmmaker with Frontline Arts in Warrior Writers, New Jersey. She's also a disabled veteran who was an Army captain in the Nuclear Cold War and First Gulf War. She now microforms and reclaims terroir of roses and aromatic plants in the mountains of New Jersey. When not painting large-scale roses with her fingers, she's engraving social justice printmaking pop-ups on handmade frontline paper reclaimed from combat uniforms and medical scrubs. Jenny?
Thank you. We move right into the clip of Tara in Veteran Voices, Conscious Community, Find Your Team.
My team? There is a deep, sensual pleasure in being part of and leading a well-honed small team, moving as one, breathing as one, mission-fused groove. My team now is an unruly, rowdy, vibrant community of printmakers and paper makers, artists and writers, spoken word poets and actors, veterans, committed to the unfettered expression of wild, life-giving creativity. In the saddle, bearing down against all odds. But no one has to die. No cities obliterated, no generations of children lost. Limbs severed, dysentery, cholera, and typhoid. Depleted uranium, damaged chromosomes, famine. Oh, sure. I lived for my small teams in the Army. Peak experience. Caught the bug early in Girl Scouts, survival camping and cleaning up estuaries, then on to West Point and General MacArthur's fields of friendly strife on the Army lacrosse and soccer teams. thundering down the field, lively banter body roll out of the body slams, running to take the shot, to score the point, or to take out the offense. Concussions, a badge of courage. I never had the typical Army experience on large Confederate named posts and divisions, the trappings of empire. Mine was a track of remote, small teams, tactical nuclear special weapons, last gasps of the nuclear Cold War, all the while trapped, captive in an abusive marriage of secret, violent horrors, destroying and being destroyed. NATO and the Warsaw Pact, we were all gonna die and we knew it. It was mass suicide. Then called back for the Gulf War. My Arabic vocabulary shifted from poetry to the language of mass destruction. Strategic targeting Baghdad, smart bombs, sleek Darth Vader Nighthawks. The war crime of obliterating the electric grid in Baghdad. After the war, I burned my uniforms in a blazing bonfire to a chorus of coyotes in the canyon. After the war, I taught my babies to stand in formation diapered and to raise a middle finger salute to those same death stealth bombers swooping in practice runs over our high desert campground in New Mexico. Some veterans get lost in isolation. I got lost. Curtains drawn shut, soul seeping out, life spark tenuous, a bottle of scotch in one hand and a gun in the other. Find your team. This is the post-war life lesson. My team now is a vibrant, unruly, rowdy community of papermakers and printmakers, actors and spoken word poets, artists, writers, veterans, all committed to the unfettered expression of wild, life-giving creativity. Peace is not only the absence of destruction, it is creation. It is whoops of joy and deep resilience, fearless feats of art epic. Find your team. I am Tara Krause, and I reinforce a piece of fearless joy.
Thank you, Tara. That was beautiful, as always.
Yes, it was.
My team.
We hear you, we see you, we love you. So, Tara, what are your reflections about the Veteran Voices program, the ones you've been involved in, and maybe how similar or different it was from your previous artwork, paper making, and writing?
Well, I must say that with Veteran Voices and Poetic Theater, this constellation of veterans arts organization that came together under Ramon's Exit 21, the VAOP. I'd love to say it, but I can't.
Veteran Arts Workshop Online Portal.
VAOP. I mean, that's what I. VAOP. But what it gave us during this pandemic, pandemic of death and free fall and sickness and mental health issues and isolation. I mean, none of us could practice our craft in studio. And you all came together, and it was 9 hours, I counted, max 9 hours a week. We were together on Zoom, week in and week out. And that does something. I mean, to me, I was always a poet from a little girl onwards. And I had read some of my poetry on stages, but I had never performed my poetry. And with Warrior Writers New Jersey, with Jan Berry and Everett Cox and Eli Wright, Sarah Mess, James Yee, and the late, great departed Frank Wagner. They would do, because most of the time I was in Frontline Arts and Frontline Paper in the studio in Branchburg, New Jersey. And we're visual artists, we're paper makers, deconstructing from uniforms, shredding up uniforms, and now medical scrubs and making them into handmade paper. And so a lot of our work is nonverbal. And then finally I began to write with Warrior Writers. And the first time I had read my work there was at the FDR Presidential Library.
Yeah.
And I must say, I got up, did my poem to silence. Absolutely nobody clapped politely. I mean, nobody threw anything at me, but I bailed. I hit the emergency section. I went walking in the historic garden there. But it's a long story. What we have done by bringing in the somatic, the embodying, the meditation, this beautiful conscious community, I think it's treasuresome. It's given me a creative retreat, almost a year-long creative retreat in the middle of a pandemic. So,
and you really embrace the programs. I mean,
yeah,
I think you've done all three, and then we were, we really, the community, you just lifted us all up. The facilitators, the other participants, having you in the room was such a beautiful event for us too. So as we started to build into the rites of passage and do more fully produced things, and then inviting the poets in again to hold that space with us within the bigger pieces.
Right.
If you missed it, we are going to have an encore presentation of rites of passage, just to let you know. Little pitch right there, drop right there.
That was a powerful show. Yeah.
Yes. And Tara, you light up every stage, every square. So we are so grateful to have you within the program, as well as helping us. I think the biggest thing that we talked about is why we do this work. And it's, if there's just one person out there struggling that hears us speak, Omar, you, me, any of the veterans or family members, and it saves them from the isolation, the suicide, we're really doing what we set out to do, was to reconnect and reunite the communities.
And I think also for me, it's kind of like I have a duty. I have chosen a duty. I've chosen part of a mission, not only to express my own story and play with archetypes and metaphors and things like that, but if we could normalize creating and living with bent brain. That's my affectionate term for PTSD. I got it from asknod.org. He was a Vietnam door gunner, also in Laos, and he's become a veteran service advocate for Agent Orange, or Agent Orange brothers and sisters. And so I use the word bent brain because let's talk about it. The process is so cruel, with so much stigma, that it leaves us not only with the brain injury, body injury, all the secondary effects in our families, but it gives us this living hell of shame. And I say, yeah, basta. This happens. And Can we find the blessing near the wound? Auguste Boal. So that's mine, and we got to dance because all we have, we survived, and we continue to survive, and we can create, and we can have belly laughs. How as good as that? Yeah.
I mean, within the darkness is and surrounding that is the seed. You've talked about the seed so often, or at least they're creating a new piece about the seed, and not being afraid of the darkness, but knowing that the darkness nurtures us and nourishes us for us to grow and bloom. And I've always liked that visualization. Omar?
I just want to start off by saying we appreciate you, Tara.
Appreciate ya.
We really do.
Appreciate ya.
Really do. And a question I want to ask is just how did your military experiences affect how you express yourself through art, your writing, your performance?
Well, it certainly gave me content.
I agree there.
I would just like to paint roses, or just talk about my roses, but I keep drawing it. No, yeah, it does give me lots of things to work on, but I think it gave me, I was thinking about that. One is the love of small teams. You live and die for that camaraderie, that crucible of where you're living and breathing, where you'll put down your life for your battle buddy. And, I saw that in guerrilla filmmaking, prior to 9/11, we'd say, okay, we've got to get the scene, at midnight on the subway, hanging off the Queensboro Bridge, we just all go there and I'd chat up and make the deli guy give me his extension cord and things like that. But it was this moving it together. It was the improvisation. It was also doing it at no cost or low cost. So that teamwork. Another is a sense of daring. Fuck it, we're going to jump. I guess where the internet will beat me. But it's a sense of boldness, a sense of daring, especially since now maybe some people's path is different, but I know I've struggled with learned helplessness in my PTSD. And that is one of the cruelest afflictions, a living hell. And so once you can discover.
Can you unpack that a little bit for us? For people
Sure.
who don't know what that means.
One of the things that I've learned, and in fact, I was sitting through a lecture series this week about the latest neuroscience on PTSD, and we got to know this. We got to know this because for a lot of us, including me, boy, I blame myself. If I had run faster, if I'd been stronger, if I could just got my ass on the road, get my shit together. I can beat this thing, and whatever the harsh tapes are. So we need to understand that trauma, dose, duration, and intensity, whether it be from combat, as we normally think of it, whether it be from racial oppression, whether it be from military sexual violence. And that's also for men and women. I think that's always, we have about 20,000 assaults, rapes per year in the armed forces for the last, then that's just what it's been for the last 4 years.
The biggest kept secrets is that there's that male military sexual trauma exists as well.
Absolutely. I think I've got, oh, here we go. I had
learned helplessness, Tara, love?
Oh, yes, thank you. Okay, hold on. That would be 13,000 women and 7,000 men a year. Okay, and just those who reported. Okay, let's go back to, I had to get the statistic in there. Learned helplessness. The trauma changes the shape of our brains, the structure of our brains. The trauma then changes the way the emotional centers of our brains organizes and understands information. And adrenaline kicks in, the hypervigilant, we're often then putting ourselves in reenactments of our traumas. So they're cumulative, that we begin to talk about trauma lines. There comes addictions that come in that. And so what happens is we've got these changes, brain chemicals going through our body, which then affects our nervous system, which then affects also our immune system, which changes the very molecules in our body. And it changes the chromosomes, epigenetics. So we've got 3 generations this can pass through. And so learned helplessness comes from, it starts with, you know, you have fight, what is it?
Fight or flight.
Flight or
Fight
freeze.
or freeze.
So Omar and I are like, we know
Thank
all
you.
3.
You know that. I know. And forgive me, you guys could teach me. Okay. So I'm just getting to
no forgiveness needed. We're all teaching each other and everyone in the audience.
You know, I love that. Yeah. And we talk about it openly, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, yeah, I got that. I mean, you always see the nodding heads.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, okay, we got PTSD corridors here. But so you begin to dissociate. You lose track of time. You numb. You're not in your body when things happen, and slowly you lose your personality. There was a gruesome medical experiment with dogs. And they put dogs in cages that had light shocks. And the dogs initially just reacted. And the longer they did it, a certain subset of those dogs began to not even try to escape it, the shocks. When they opened the door to the cage, most of the dogs, you know, got out of it. They bailed. Some of them did not. That, to me, is the definition of learned helplessness. And, you know, it's horrifying. It's horrifying to us. It's horrifying to our family members. And it takes a real heroic effort to function on a daily basis. But the great news, and this is where this year comes in for me, because I experientially and existentially learned that we can change our brain structure through not only down-regulating the negative. You know, you get clean and sober, you go to your therapy, you take your fistful of VA cocktail meds, you learn all sorts of healthy ways of living, you learn to regulate your anger. And then we have upregulation of positive, the somatic, being in our bodies. And this, to me, is where you guys, for me, WVET, MJ's meditation, Karen and MJ, bringing it into veteran voices. That, to me, is if we're doing, the embodiment, but also then in conscious community. And when we do this, as we have done consistently and had fun, laughed, felt free, felt honest, felt authentic, we can then change our brain structures right down to our chromosomes. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, because as you mentioned, the model we use at Poetic Theater is the model from WVET. Women, Veterans, Empowered and Thriving. And one of the key things that we use in that model is the community agreements and the repetition of the community agreements and the practice of the community agreements. In essence, the kindness, the compassion, the non-judgment, the things that we essentially have to relearn after being in the military and continue to reach out to other humans to practice these things with us, whether it's first in workshop and then extends to our family and then extends to the community. I mean, that is the essence of the brain, to do this repetition. Tara, we're going to do another clip.
Roll it.
We're going to do the pink pajamas because you spoke earlier about some of the things in this piece, and I'd really like to see people, let people see you embody it.
Embody it. At Frontline Arts, I bow into the sacred space of the printmaking studio. I grab a rotary cutter and slice through the VA psych ward, pink pajamas, and the wad of men's tighty whities. Rip the seams with all my might, sound of tearing stitches shrieking. Cut the threads of my backstory. The bombing, the killing, and the degradation I survived. No longer am I gagged. I dice up the jagged strip tatters into postage stamp size shreds, and then toss the pink and white shredded chaos into the roiling cauldron pot of borax water. Shredded, boiled residue that haunts the underside of being a West Point cadet. The pink tax paid full as a combat arms field artillery officer, not the sweet pink of my childhood canopy bed, nor the pink of one of my rapist's daughter's bedroom. He raped me in that pink girly bedroom while his perfect wife and 2.5 children were in church bells ringing in the distance. These pink pajamas were thrust at me by the intake psych nurse in the VA Lions Hospital psych lockdown ward as the ambulance team loosened my restraints on my gurney. This pink is a particular specific shade, Miller pink, engineered by a duo of Navy shrinks, psychological castration by color. The word people talk about in hushed tones but understand. It saves our lives.
Wow.
Thank you, Tara. It's that I think I've had experiences. I wanted to touch on this where I've taken the breath out of the room. And there's that moment when you're first a poet, when you don't realize that people are so shocked and awed by your word, pun intended, by your words instead of a bomb, that it blows the whole room up. And I think for a long time I was like, oh, I don't know if I'm a good poet because nobody claps, because nobody knows what to do, because we're exposing these visceral, uncomfortable, rarely ever heard feelings, emotions, experiences. That pink bedroom scene, just, yeah, no words. Just, I was like, boop. So
It
we're
blew
going to
me
go right
away.
into our, oh yeah, go ahead, Omar. Did you want
I
to
was
say?
just gonna say the pink bedroom scene. You painted it so vividly, it blew me away. Just the thought of how can this be happening?
Well, that's, let us remember trauma. Our reactions to trauma, we have no words. It to fathom what is going on. How many, the degrees of bizarre, and then our brains actually give us a blessing, when we cannot fathom something, and we survive.
So we ask this of all our interviewees, and so we'll jump into our question here.
There we go.
The military has implemented and removed Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and recently reversed the ban on transgender individuals serving openly. I was a woman in the military, which affected how I acted in service when I reintegrated, and very few people at first believed I served in combat, or they assumed I was a military spouse. There are many different issues surrounding gender and the military. So we wanted to ask you, Tara, as well. Did the military's strict protocols on gender, sexuality, and the general stripping of our identities affect your service, your reintegration, and your expression in the arts?
A tad. I sometimes joke that, my mother wanted me to go to a finishing school. And so we kind of negotiated around and we ended up at finishing school on the Hudson. No, I mean, that's a bad feminist joke. Look, my mother's family had served the country in every war since the Revolutionary War. The men in my mother's family were all warriors, went to the academies, mostly in the naval academies, and the women were artists. But when my generation came up, and I was in the late 70s, we had Ellie Smeal and the National Organization of Women, and there was this exciting time of the Equal Rights Amendment. And so I, being very idealistic, I said, yes, by God, I've got to go to West Point. It's the hardest thing I can do because women have a duty to serve in the military as well as to have the rights. Well, I mean, once we got over the kind of a woman shouldn't be going issues within our family, I went and they supported me. I mean, from my stepfather, me running behind my stepfather's big Buick, and getting ready physically to go to, the town very much supported me. However, when I got there and I was ready for the stress of being hazed, I had bought in, I believed so much. I wanted to be the best damn officer that I could be. I believed in the flag and God, duty and honor. And I was not prepared for the force of human hatred. I was not psychologically capable to understand. Nobody in our family had ever acted that way. And to walk into the buzzsaw of hatred, and it's very different. Maybe when someone's just giving you a hassle, that, so you try to perform better. I made it very much that I wanted to pass as a weak man, so I could pass the male's level of fitness. That was my kind of thing. But there's another dimension, there's a dimension of hatred and the denigration of the other. The other must be destroyed for some way these guys to have their identity as warriors. That was devastating to me. And I kind of redoubled my effort and showed back up each morning. But it takes a toll, and we didn't have the language for it.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't imagine if how many rapes does it take to break a person? And we didn't have the language to say, excuse me, in the morning, can I report something? No. And the few women that did, they left, and there was a term that to rape them out. So that left a huge issue with me. And
well, yeah, from idealism of God and country and being this woman coming into this world, drinking the Kool-Aid, and then
drinking the Kool-Aid, man, I was chugging it.
The contrast of that is from what you said was, rape them out.
Yeah, and it was it was the underbelly. And I hear this over and over again from women and men. You walk a lot of miles in the VA hospital corridors, and you hear, I just wanted to be the best that I could. And my commander or my sergeant and I didn't have problems once I got into the Army. I was an artillery officer, only women in units. With my soldiers, if I was good enough and proved that I could earn their trust and went to the wall for everything that they needed, it was like, okay, they really didn't understand why I would want to be an artillery officer, but they accepted me. It was only with my peers and then with my senior officers, and that was ugly and sometimes perverse.
Yeah.
That's so
and
sad.
please go on.
I was just saying that's so sad and disappointing to hear.
How about your reintegration, Tara, like
Well,
as you got out of the
well,
military?
it's very interesting when you use that reintegration, and I think it's crucial. I'm so glad that there are so many programs that try to do good, sometimes fail, but we didn't have that word. I went from the Gulf War, and I got accepted at NYU in the executive MBA program. And so the next day, I'm sitting there in a lecture hall with Wall Streeters. And the first time I was meeting things, and it was kind of like, and they didn't quite understand who I was. But that was cool because I wasn't a veteran. My identity as a veteran, I thought veterans were in the organizations and wore the hats and had, important community roles and saluted the flag and those. I wasn't a veteran until I crashed into the VA Long Beach Veterans Hospital psychiatric ward to save my life. And so what I did, because I didn't feel, I did not find myself as a veteran. I found myself by serendipity, because my hair was on fire. When I left the Gulf War, I was racked, trying to expiate the blood and the screams of the mothers of Baghdad. And it led me, and I'm so glad, it led me into the human rights movement. So all of a sudden in New York, I was working on human rights education. I was women's human rights. I was part of the negotiating teams at the UN and we won the first Annunciation with 1 million thumbprint signatures from around the world for the human right to adequate housing and freedom from forced eviction. So that was, along with the arts community, that was my reintegration until it unraveled. There, folks in the Veteran Center talk about, we'd love to get people in for treatment as soon as they get off the plane. First thing, kiss your family, come on, get on the bus. We're going to, have a residential program. We're going to treat you almost prophylactically before the PTSD sets in. But most of us, it takes about 10 years to crash it. 10 lost years of untreated PTSD.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot in our generation as well.
Yep.
That there was like a lot of us that tried to go to college, tried to do the job thing, and then it's like it ended up depletion and burnout and then the crash. And it's like 7 to 10 years I've seen with a lot of it. Or the opposite direction. Didn't try to go to college, got right into drugs and alcohol, became homeless.
Yep.
So
or
it's
both.
like, there's those very similar like through lines.
Yeah.
But and I've definitely seen that, and I think the identification now is more significant than ever. And I really invite people that are serving and are just coming back out to start in these programs, to start in the writing
Absolutely.
programs, to start in our programs, just to start getting a foundation underneath them. Because if they can start retraining their brain for that kindness, compassion, and non-judgment, then it'll be easier to excel through all of their hopes and dreams.
Yeah, it's kind of like
with things we had, which were like, meh.
Yeah, and well, it's like the Groot learning to be human.
Yeah.
You know, and Steppenwolfert. You know, I mean, if we can unprogram our minds or plant seeds within the young veterans, plant seeds. They don't have to think of themselves as veterans. Come be a writer. Come be an actor.
Yeah.
You know, come be an artist. And hang out with our multi-generational, you know, diverse crew and see that we're all about making art.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with what you said, Tara, about the 10-year period. I never looked at it that way, but it was about approximately 10 years after I got out of service, and I was a student at Brooklyn College, and my post-traumatic stress symptoms started acting up so bad that I had to quit school in my last semester and go back 5 years later just to pick up the final semester.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I never looked at the time frame.
And nobody tells us, hey, you might have these nice little spurts and everything, but then you know, just being mindful, or even just maintenance of your mental health. Maintenance.
Not only maintenance, but we also have to, again, be honest, be open. This is what happens to us, so that we know, so the lore, you know, goes out. So the community people within, and I don't usually use the word veterans and civilians, you know, in the non-veteran community, you know, in the local communities, if somebody can talk to a young veteran and say, hey, get help now.
Yeah.
Or, you know, our family members.
With a therapist, or start, you know, just kind of doing a couple things here and there with veteran organizations, like having your hand on your own pulse and the pulse of the community that you may need to really rely on at some point.
Yep.
You know, people often go one way or the other with their workshops. Either I wasn't feeling good enough to go to the workshop, and I was like, well, that's the best time to go, is when you don't feel well.
Yes.
Or, you know, there's nothing wrong with me. And I was like, well, then how about we empower your triumphs and build you into the community, you know, help you. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Tara. So let's hear you.
Let's hear me.
Yes.
We're going to move right into another clip from Reckoning.
Oh, man. Yeah.
Yeah. We're going to see the arc here.
Yes.
Which we love.
2 days and nights ago, I signed the protest letter as a group of concerned West Point grads to this morning's cadet graduation. I scanned the headlines: CNN, New York Times, Washington Post, Fox. 2 clicks away there, my name and town for America to see. There I stand naked, though this time not at attention. The West Pointers' letters list of signatories grows, approaching battalion strength. The starting furor of comments. Moral courage, its cost certain. Do not read the comments. Fellow graduates on Freedom Facebook forums bay for our traitorous heads. One woman graduate reports rapey DMs. That cruel, ingrained backlash riots nearly grooved through my West Point survivor body. Only 4 classmates, counting me, signed a letter at first. 4 out of 1,000, not even a squad. 1 Black man and 3 women, a Latina, a Jew, and a veterinarian. Walk into a bar riffs my jazzman son. Jazz reharming and improvised funk for our future, fusing the visceral, guttural, determined American cries for justice and the marching protest prayer feet rhythm in the streets of 2,000 cities.
Wow.
Tara, remember when we discussed maybe just jumping right into one of your
Yeah, would you like me to?
after? Yeah, let's do that.
In 1996, when Reverend Siti Vivian launched the National Center for Human Rights Education with activist and scholar Loretta Ross in Atlanta, I played a small role as rapporteur, a stenographer of his brilliance. I do not define myself by denigrating others. Martin Luther King Jr. meant to build a human rights movement. One stormy, pouring New York City night, we had just finished a long day of drafting principles with the International Committee for Human Rights Education at the Namibian or some other country's ornate UN mission, maybe even Canada or Austria. I stood with them under the Brown Street entrance awning as taxis sped by in torrents, blurred velocity uptown in search of fares on Lexington or 3rd Avenue. Reverend Vivian stepped gracefully, dignity personified, into the street to get a cab. The blur continued unabated. He came back in under the awning, drenched, looked at Loretta, and said calmly, "Tara, why don't you hail the cab?" I must have looked clueless. Of course, Reverend. In the best New Yorker fashion, I flung out my arm. A taxi screeched to a halt. It was the beginning of my education.
Wow. Tara. You know, growing up down south, I had to face racism and discrimination, and hearing what you just said, it just hits home to me. I was forced to realize as a child that the world wasn't going to be fair to me. And when I joined the Air Force, it was just as challenging for me as in civilian life.
I can't imagine.
And I had to constantly fight against stereotypes of being called lazy and slow. And no matter how hard I worked, I couldn't make my superiors see that I was anything other than that. And my only escape was just to keep my head down and work as hard as I could and just study hard until I promoted my way out of this type of hazing and constant abuse. And the question I have for you, Tara, is after hearing that story, what was your experience with race while on active duty in the military?
In active duty on the military, it was interesting. In artillery, we had almost two predominant groups. One was kind of a southern, South Florida, at least in my units. Another one was Black and was coming in from Detroit and New York, at least within our, the cannon cockers, the red legs. And I remember there were incidents, there were race fights, at unit parties, you'd have a certain time and you had to make sure certain time you play country music and a certain time you'd play R&B. And that was open, and we're coming out of the 70s of riots, and it was you know, when you have people that are giving their all, and it was something that I never had a problem with the racial issue. Not to say I don't have racism within me. I mean, the Summer of Reckoning very much is teaching me, you know, the anti-racist. But I found the most difficult people and often leaders were Southern men, Southern white men. And it was over and over a pattern. And sorry, you know, whether it was homophobia or whether it was racism, and openly, and you know, my plebe roommate, Nadja Grammer West, went on to become a 3, maybe she's been promoted to a 4-star. Amazing, one of the best of all of us. And I'm always amazed at the burden it takes to be the best soldier, to be turned down over and over and over again because of the color of your skin. And it's sickening. And you know, there were times when I became an adjutant for our artillery group, I would go toe to toe with the colonel, who was a good old Alabama boy. You can't do that, you know, and it would be like, LT, a captain, stand down. But you know what? That was then. I'd love to say it's changed, but we've seen it over and over again. And I cannot tell you how precious privilege to have been with our extended community this summer reckoning, you know, the murders that keep on going of George Floyd, and all the 20, 30, 100 names of women and men of color, Black people gunned down, and millions took to the street. You know, 75 different demonstrations over that 3-month period, 96 of them completely peaceful, nonviolent. And I watched us struggle with our whiteness. I watched you, and I had such a privilege, Omar, you and Jimmy and James and Stacey Bell, Tara B, Zena, to grapple with this multi-level of heartbreak and shame. And one of the things I learned, not to be shocked. That was something, as a white woman, I believed early on, and I would carry that burden of my beliefs that life was fair. Well, of course it is for a white woman. Okay, I mean, not always, and it isn't fair, but the presumption was fairness when it's not fair, when it's based upon, in fact, this week,
when the systems are aligned against you. It's
absolutely, and there's systems of white supremacy, perpetuated and systemic. I watched a lecture this week, and I really want to get him to come and talk to us as veterans artists and BIPOC brothers and sisters, and for us to get the information. It's Ty Seidul. He's retired West Point historian that wrote, where is his, he carries apart the myth of the lost cause, the poison that went down with spread. And he takes it down and he shows exactly what racism within the Army, within West Point, you know, white supremacy for the sake of white power at the expense of Black citizens, what it has done and how it carries on. how it carries on to this day. I'm sorry, I should.
You don't have to apologize,
Yeah.
Tara.
I could say,
Omar
Tara,
love.
just that the toughest part for my service was just, like you said, trying to be the best that I could be and feeling the intentional being passed over, being looked over
Mm.
when I showed up on time, when I always looked sharp in uniform, and then somebody else get the recognition or somebody else get the award.
Yep.
And, but I can say the greatest thing that I earned from the military as far as being a black male is learning perseverance.
Uh, yep.
So at the
Yep.
same time, in spite of, I
Right.
would still do my best. I would still show up. I would still look great in my uniform and still be proud of what I'm doing for my country. And I could say just on the back end of it, being back in the States and seeing the things and that have happened over the past couple of years as far as the police brutality against black citizens and people of color, I could just say that part is disappointing because there's so many officers in uniform who were officers in the wore the same uniform as I did, wore camouflage as well. And I just wonder what happened.
Yeah.
You
Yep.
know, we
How
could
could
go
it?
to war alongside each other and basically put our lives on the line to die for each other. But the same individuals will come back to the stateside and brutalize their brothers that were right over there having their back and protecting them during military service. And that's, I just look back on that and I'll never forget. And that leads me into this, Tara, that I
Mhm.
look back over my military career and the 12 years that I did spend in uniform, and they were just an act. I had to create the persona of the airman that they wanted me to be.
Yep.
And that was a far cry from who I really was. I was living behind the camouflage.
Mm.
And if I could tell that airman right now to embrace all of the challenges that he was going through, and that one day I'll be able to look back on that and use it, like you said, for material, for inspiration.
Right. Right.
And I want to ask you, do you have a message for your past self, whether either from officer
Yeah.
training school at West Point or on deployment or anytime throughout your career
You
that you
know,
tell yourself now?
it's interesting just in the last 2 days or so last week with you guys taking picture of me as a cadet and then me now as an artist. I know I carried those pictures, I turned them in, but I hadn't seen them right up to be able to see my younger self
Mm.
and who I am now. And I worked very hard to have compassion for that younger self. And I would just wish for that younger self had more tools to handle not taking human hatred personally, which is a tall step, of not being affected her self-esteem, her self-worth, her self-value, her life in the eyes of others. And I was a creative person. Probably if my family system had been done, I should have gone to art school instead of West Point. So, maybe it was a kind of not a misfit, but not the tightest fit you could have. I would have told her, don't lose your sense of play. Don't you lose your sense of creativity. And also I would say, remember that this the grit that you learned as both survival and as drive, that force of keeping on going beyond the limits of human endurance, that grit will stand you well. But then I'd also say, don't let the bastards get you down.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And then forgive yourself. I think that's what I think a lot about when Omar asked that question, is about not only not letting the bastards get you down, but not to turn on yourself.
Oh man. And that if I had those emotional, psychological tools. If it had been in the open, whereby people could understand that this was systemic, I thought I was the only one ever graduated from West Point with PTSD. I mean, that's a heavy, even though I'd crunch the numbers, okay, what's the assault rate? Okay, 80% survive it, go on after, then we got 20% with PTSD. Okay, let's look at chronic, let's, you know, and so statistically I knew that 3% of the people were walking wounded. I knew that they were out there, but I had never met one.
Yeah.
And that was when slowly I began to, you know, start talking about it. And now I'm not, I'm doing my stuff with my artist tribe and not within more formal organizations so that I can speak my truth, you know, that we can, because one of the things I love about what we're doing, we're looking, those lessons we learned of war, we're looking to build life. We're looking to build sanity. You know, it's some of the Dharma art, the Buddhist art that I studied when I was in LA, in a Sangha of Buddhist artists. And it was kado, which was the term for flower arranging, the ikebana. And the word kado was flower warrior. And I love that, because if we're making an offering, like when I'm do a poem, I'm giving that offering of myself for the benefit of others. And I just love that, because it's in our community that we're creating other communities, that we're creating alternative futures that are worth living.
Yeah. And a lot of it, I mean, I'll speak in
Yeah.
I don't want to tear my family apart. I don't want all that rage that I release on the stage, and it comes off of me, and it doesn't have to sit inside me and roll around and be poisonous. Like, and then it's out and it goes up into the universe or whatever, and I don't have to hold it anymore. And then it also doesn't come out in spurts like throughout the week or the day. It's like, okay, I have a space to channel this into something that's artistic instead of destructive, or creation, as you've said, instead of destruction.
And something that we haven't talked about now, and we just kind of like, I think we're beginning to get a consensus that it needs to be dwelled on, but mothering while bent brain. You talked about the rage and your family members, you know, those things that they bear. And I'm always saying that I mean, military kids kind of get something, especially with the war effort, you know, a nod to the psychological burden that they carry, you know, multiple deployments of their parents, you know, the deaths, the woundings, you know, the PTSD. But in my mind, kids of PTSD vets are transcenders. And they're PTSD transcenders. And that to me needs to be celebrated. That to me,
transcenders.
Transcenders.
A little bit for us.
Yeah, and it's it's look. Being a single mother with PTSD, with two sons raising them up, fighting for your VA benefits, but not getting service connection because you haven't proved that it happened. Enough. I mean, it took me 11 years and two ways up to the Board of Veterans Appeals, and I had the best gunslinger, you know, veterans attorney in the country doing mine. And it was just cruel. But you're raising your children in poverty. Even at 70%, if somebody gets 70%, you can't raise a child on $1,200 a month, $300 a week. I mean, I know that some people can, but it means that you're housing insecure, You know, you're making beans and pasta with a little bit of tomato sauce into pasta fagioli and passing it off to your kids.
Yeah.
You're accepting meat from hunters or fishermen. And you're fighting to be able to give a stability to your children when you yourself are depleted. And we don't necessarily, I mean, I know that there are some men out there that are single parents to their children. Boy, that's fantastic. But the people I've met, both in the VA hospitals and out, most of the time, their families are already blown up.
Yeah.
They, at best, have a financial obligation, but they're not in the day-to-day slog. And so mothering these children through no fault of their own, who may have their brain have been impacted by our trauma or our mother's trauma. You know, we get into this, Rachel Heberling and I get very much into this when we talk about underpulping. You know, let's look at the whole thing. So these children are born in utero, they are marked. You know, and there's a lot of shame, and it's something that I don't yet have the words for it. In fact, the other day when you said, go free write about it, let's see where the discussion can take.
There it goes.
Holy shit, I kept blowing through the 10 minutes, and I said, nope, not ready yet.
I'm not ready yet.
But I think we should.
Yeah, it's gracious of you to open this door for us, because I wasn't sure that you wanted to tonight.
Well, Maria, no, heads up, props up to Maria.
Yeah.
And I just love the way she calls her children star seeds. You know, because we have the ability, you know, if our nation isn't going to recognize the children of PTSD vets, and I mean, granted, my sons could not have gone to college without the VA educational benefits.
Yeah.
You know, and it enabled them to do it. But we need to talk about this. We need to look at what is the grit and the resilience of, I mean, for me, redemption came with my jazz man son, you know, playing jazz guitar in Kimmel Center. It was like, wow, how did he do that? How did he come from an embattled childhood that you do your best, you do your absolute best, but sometimes it's not good enough, you know, just because it's PTSD. And they transcend. They have this grit, they have this creativity.
They have the grit from you. There is two sides to PTSD. Let's not be confused about that. Because PTSD, as it was best explained to me by my specialist psychologist that my parents paid for, because I couldn't get him in the VA, he said, PTSD is your human reaction to extraordinary circumstances. So because I am human, I have post-traumatic stress disorder. And that was something I could accept and then build off of.
Yeah.
And because I have post-traumatic stress, I needed to learn these skills that now I share with other veterans and also my children, my stepchildren, other people's children, anybody that'll listen, anybody that shows up at a workshop can have my community agreement.
What was it, glitter sheets? What was that marvelous glitter board of conscious community of a peer? And
we have some questions. Do you want to jump into questions? Are you feeling cool about that?
Let's do it. Let's do it.
From Sarah Mess. Hi, love. You're on
Hey,
Facebook
Sarah.
Live. We love you. Everybody
Hey,
thank you, sister.
Sarah Mess wants to know, how many years was it before you found women veterans in the community after coming home from war, and also when leaving the military? So when did you find your women vets?
When did I want to say through Frontline into Veterans Voices, you know, and you know, your organization, Jenny, with WVET, and and plus I love in Frontline Arts we have it was not just Eli Wright and Dave Keith who came back from their war, heads on fire, started ripping uniforms and doing it. They merged with the New Jersey Print Center, which was from the 1970s, and there were women artists back then. So they were pioneering women as artisans. And so it's got this lovely, so that was also women, but women that I could throw down with and laugh and cry with, that's you guys. So thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
And I'll say this real quick, Tara, that honestly, especially over this past year since we were doing everything virtually, it's given me the opportunity to drop in and get to hear stories that I would have never heard. And I'll say just honestly, without a shadow of a doubt, the bravery of the women in these workshops have given me courage to stand and tell my truth. And I'll say because that I never ever knew the impact of military service on women. I remember first getting out of the military and going to the VA and realizing there were no women in the VA as other than the ones who worked there. And just hearing the stories of the complications that, I mean, the VA is horrible. I think trying to get your benefits is a fight for about everybody.
Right, right.
Just hearing the denial that they say that women don't have PTSD, and I just feel that guys get a break. When we get home, we can check out. But as women, you can't check out. You have to be a mother, a wife, a spouse, a support. There's so many things that are on your plate that are not on the plate of gentlemen.
Yeah, yeah.
And just through these workshops and art, just hearing your story and hearing how the military was so brutal, and I just had a totally different experience through it, and it's an eye-opening thing. And I just anytime we can amplify these stories and voices, I think is pertinent, because these need to be heard, the struggles that women are going through, and not in a bad way saying that the military is bad, but no, so that we can all come up and fix them together until somebody's saying these out loud, saying these things that are happening out loud. People just don't know.
Yeah, well, and I feel that way about our Black veterans' voice as artists, to be able to be, in the room, even if it's Zoom, but in the room to hear the pain of the daily, just was amazing. And the trust that we were all able to create, so that when you do something in your art and I can go, oh, that's
we can breathe for each other, hold space for each other.
Exactly. Holding that space.
Beautiful part.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have another question from Mary Jo McConnell. Tara, the brilliance of your mind is only eclipsed by the light that emanates from your soul.
Thank you, MJ. Whoa. I'll pay you later. Thank you.
Given the deep moral injury you faced at West Point, what allows you to identify as a veteran today?
Wow.
Ooh. I'm very lucky, and this is with Frontline. In Frontline, we do a lot of work for peace. We very much deconstruct the cost of war. And for veterans, as Everett Cox goes, he says, I'm learning to be a veteran, and to speak from the point of view that the wars that we've had in our generations have not been for democracy, have not been for all the things that said. And so that to me is, I'm really proud of scrappy veterans and Veterans for Peace. When Jan Berry and the whole group from TNEC go and stand vigils. When I see in these pictures of last summer, veterans standing, not veterans charging and crapping inside the Capitol building in such an egregious insurrection, but when I see veterans standing on the line, white veterans stepping up, as a human shield, Black veterans turning the flag upside down, and other veterans that are going as veterans, as patriotic. There are many ways that we could be veterans. So I guess that's my definition of being a veteran. Yes, we served. There is something that we do as citizens, and not just citizens, whether we're documented or not. Are we living our lives whereby the human rights of others are fulfilled? Is our government, and our government is accountable to protect and defend the fulfillment of those rights? And that's political, civil, economic human rights, cultural, and social rights. So that's my definition of veterans. It's kind of like my definition of public art is the defacing of Confederate statues, like in Richmond, whereby the community, it was community art, it defacing the General Lee. And then you had the folklorist dancers, because it's Emmett Till's birthday in Richmond. They came out and they danced, and classically trained ballerinas and that male ballet dancer danced upon that amazing, beautiful sculpture, that was completely, General Lee was kind of rendered graffiti, a cab to I want to be free, Black Lives Matter. And then at night, in fact, I'm just doing this pop-up to use my poem from last summer, the Barricades poem, with this pop-up. And so one of the main images is of the Richmond statue at night with Frederick Douglass's face projected on the graffitied monument. How fantastic it is. And when you hear the children that saw that is making culture. That is being a participant in our society, where it does not demean or kill the other. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox.
No apologies.
No.
I just
speak
Such an artist,
like
Tara.
that and then apologize. What is happening?
What is happening? You're right.
Your own words.
I own them, damn it.
Own them. Yes.
Yes.
And
Thank
Tara, you have
Tara.
such a beautiful way with words. I learn a new word every time I hear you speak. And I really, really appreciate that.
And Tara, I think you really touched on something beautiful that maybe we don't acknowledge enough. You and I are both, Jan Berry was my mentor as well. Yes. So, he came home and began to build a foundation that we now can stand on.
Yes.
And unite. And the Vietnam veterans that I know Sarah Mess has very similar experiences with. These Vietnam veterans that embraced us as artists and didn't treat us less than because we were women.
Yep. Dale
changed the dialogue. It changed the dialogue of our lives. And we weren't fighting to get on stage. They were like, here, I would send my poetry to Jan, and I would say, please help me because I can't edit. I don't know anything.
Right. Like you do for me.
Yeah, and then the families that supported us. So we got Jim Fallon, Peggy Fallon, Jan Berry, and Paula, and Nancy Nygaard, and Walt
Yeah.
Nygaard, and we have these beautiful foundation of families of Vietnam veterans and their families
Yeah.
lifting us up to come into the spotlight and keep telling the stories.
And we dance on their shoulders.
Yes.
And it's I'm often amazed at the poetry of witness. Jan talks about poets being not just the journalist as a first draft of history, but this ancient role of telling the stories, and to be able to have their model of being that was to stand up and speak truth.
Yeah.
Speak truth and under a lot of fire.
Yes.
That is a sweet legacy. That is a legacy that every time that I begin to say, why am I doing this, being vulnerable? Can't I just go back and paint my roses? Wouldn't it be nice? I remember that.
I just want to piggyback off of that same thing with Jan Berry. He's just been so influential in my poetic career because he always reached out and found me and invited me to speak. He gave me a platform, gave me a stage, and it's people like Jan who have opened the doors for so many others who we're coming up now that we wouldn't have had the confidence in some ways to go out there and just speak our truth so rawly and so authentically if it wasn't for the ones who didn't have that when they got out. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jan.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Paula, and thank you, Joanne and Nancy, for our Sunday morning Warrior Veterans poet group.
We need
and
to
Sarah
here. We need to get.
Sarah, yes.
I have some comments to read from Sarah Messa as well. She said, Jan Berry made a poet out of me. I thought I was just ranting and raging on private pages and then realized she was a poet.
Oh, beautiful.
MJ says, I'd like to acknowledge the many veterans who are also mothers, biologically, compassionately, by design. I see you and appreciate you.
Thank you.
Mary Coral?
That's my aunt. My aunt, the actress who taught me that, oh my goodness, and her mother and my mother would put on shows in the backyard. She has been an international artist and a director, and she makes the most amazing May Queen. So
she says, amazing. Love from your family, Mary and Caleb.
Oh, and Caleb's a dancer.
You've taught us so much. She said, you've taught us so much. We see you, Tara. We see you.
I'm gonna tear up here.
We see you and we hear you.
Paula Vergoven. Hello, Paula.
Yes.
Hey,
How
Paula.
many times have we slept on your couches and been fed by you? Thank you. We love you, Jan and Paula.
Yes.
And last comment here, and then we'll begin to wrap up if we don't have any more questions. I just want Rachel Herbeling. I did my best I could. I just want to say I love you so much, Tara. You never cease to amaze me, and it's an honor to tag along for any part of your fantastic journey, continually planting and blossoming out of the ashes. Yes.
Roses growing out of concrete. Yes.
Your admiring fan.
Oh, Rachel. Well, you're my fearless leader of Frontline Arts.
Beautiful. All right. So it looks like we don't have any more questions.
I thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for your great questions out in the audience and Zoom and in Facebook Live. And thank you, Tara. We appreciate you so much for everything you do for the veteran community and veteran voices program specifically. And we love working with you, Tara, and we're so grateful to count on you as a member of our community. Thanks for letting us be a part of your team and you being a part of ours.
Thank you. My tribe, Raise and Wind Horse.
In the absence of ritual for past and now present warriors, we close the space of vulnerability and truth with a reinforcement. Saying, I reinforce something you learned today or you're practicing in your life. Then we will breathe together as a community, and I encourage the audience to breathe with us. Tara, would you like to go first?
My name is Tara Krause, and I reinforce this conscious community. Oh, yeah. And I pass it to Omar.
Thank you, Tara.
For Tara, deep breath in and release.
And thank you, Tara. Thank you again for being here today. And I'd like to reinforce finding your team.
Your team.
Deep breath in for Omar and release.
And I'm going to pass it to Miss Jenny.
My name is Jenny, and I reinforce truth, courage, and vulnerability.
Yeah.
Deep breath in for me. And release. Thank you for joining our community.
So much glitter in our tribe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for joining our community. Choose thriving, not surviving.
Yep. And thank you, Jeremy and Poetic Theater.
Yes, thank you.
Y'all have a wonderful evening.
Have a great evening. Thank you.